Thank you all for coming. We are here to make some observations and comments about the recent case involving the capture of Mr. Al-Libi, who is suspected of orchestrating the bombing of our embassies in Tanzania and Kenya in the 90s. Number one, we want to congratulate our military and intelligence community for this successful operation. They certainly did the right thing. I want to congratulate the President for signing off on the attempts to capture people in Somalia and the successful capture of one of the Americans' most wanted terrorists, Al-Libi, who's an Al-Qaeda operative, a first-string member of the Al-Qaeda organization who has long ties to Osama bin Laden. Here's our concern. We're using boots on the ground to capture people, which is a good change in policy. It's hard to interrogate a dead man. So when you capture someone like Al-Libi, they become a treasure trove about Al-Qaeda's present form and the opportunity to gather intelligence about future pending attacks. Our concern is this. The administration has placed this terrorist on a Navy vessel for the purpose of gathering intelligence by the high-value interrogation team. They're treating him as an enemy combatant under the law of war. That is a good decision. The bad decision is not to put him in a permanent confinement facility that will allow long-term interrogation. Contrary to popular belief, what led to the bin Laden raid was not information elicited from torture, in my view, was from good, long, hard intelligence gathering from Gitmo detainees over a period of time. In Al-Libi's case, he is on an American warship somewhere in the Mediterranean because the administration refuses to use Guantanamo Bay. He should be classified as an enemy combatant, but putting him on a Navy vessel for a matter of days or weeks is not a proper way to gather intelligence in the war on terror. This system of using Navy vessels, Navy warships in lieu of Gitmo, compromises our ability to gather intelligence. Because the best tool we have in intelligence gathering is time itself. I don't believe in torturing detainees. I believe in the Geneva Convention. I've been a military lawyer for over 30 years. I believe in the international and domestic regimes about humane treatment and incarceration of enemy prisoners, even unlawful combatants like Al-Libi. I do believe it is vital to gather intelligence in the war on terror, and when you capture someone like this, to limit yourself to days on a Navy vessel in terms of interrogation and detention is a huge mistake. I just believe we're not going to be able to gather the intelligence under this system that's necessary to protect our country. And we're going to urge the Congress to take a position on this through having a resolution. And we're here to urge the President today to change this policy. I very much appreciate the fact that you went in to capture this guy. Capturing Al-Libi presents a great opportunity to gather intelligence. But Mr. President, this system of using Navy vessels for days, not weeks, months, or years, to gather intelligence is a political choice that I think is going to undercut our national security. Not having a confinement facility available to the intelligence community and the military to do long-term interrogations of terrorist suspects is a major mistake and will harm our national security. Naval vessels are not an adequate substitute for a confinement facility. So we're urging a change in policy. We're appreciating the fact that we're now going into the capture business. We're not killing everybody by drones, but we have an ill-conceived and I think a system with fatal flaws in it when it comes to gathering intelligence. And the three of us are here to urge Congress and the President to work together to deal with a system to better gather information when it comes to future captures. And finally, this war is a long way from being over. The threats are metastasizing. Northern Africa is becoming the new front. And without the ability to gather intelligence in a meaningful way, our nation is very much at risk. So with this, I would introduce Senator Ayotte.
Thank you. We have already heard that the discussion that al-Libi is a potential intelligence gold mine. And I want to join in the commendation for the president and also our men and women in the intelligence community and our military who have captured al-Libi and thank them for a job well done. We are only going to protect America by gathering intelligence from people like al-Libi, knowing everything that they know about Al-Qaeda, their associates, and their operation. We know that al-Libi has had at least 2 decades of Al-Qaeda experience at the highest levels. As of the early 1990s, al-Libi was working with bin Laden directly. He assisted with the 1998 Kenya and Tanzania bombings that killed 224 people, including 12 Americans. And he's reported to have played a critical role as an intermediary with Zawahiri in an effort to establish an al-Qaeda-affiliated operation network in Libya. So in order to gather this information, we need to make sure that we aren't immediately reading him his Miranda rights, and obviously once he gets transferred to a civilian setting in the United States, those rights will be read to him. And in order to gather some information from someone who has 2 decades of experience with Al-Qaeda, that is going to take a sufficient long period of time. And what we have seen with the grab and the killing of Osama bin Laden, that took a substantial period of time to put that picture together. And so we risk losing valuable intelligence when we have a policy right now that takes individuals like al-Libi, who I'm very pleased again that he's been captured, and I hope we are able to capture more members of Al-Qaeda that can provide intelligence to protect America. But a Navy vessel is not a substitute for a detention facility like at Guantanamo Bay, which is a top-rate detention facility. In fact, since I got to the Senate, I've been asking our military officials about what is our long-term detention and intelligence policy. And we've had a lack of policy with this administration, as demonstrated by the fact that we do have someone like al-Libi on a Navy vessel right now instead of a long-term detention facility. I asked senior members of our military back in 2011, if we captured Ayman al-Zawahiri tomorrow, what would we do with him? And I got answers like this. In February of 2011, when I asked that question, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, Michael Vickers, said that the administration is in the final stages of establishing its detention policy. Carter Ham told me in April of 2011 he would need some lawyerly help on answering that one when asked what the United States forces would do if a member of Al-Qaeda was captured in Africa. We now know that they're using a ship. We saw it with Warsami, who was captured and who was kept on a ship for a couple of months and plus days, and instead of being brought to a detention facility. So I've asked our officials about that. I asked Secretary Panetta in September of 2011 about the need for a detention policy for the country, and he said we need a long-term detention policy. And when I asked him about the Warsami case, where Warsami was kept on a ship to be interrogated instead of being brought to Guantanamo, he said, I think the Warsami case is instructive, and it has, now you want your Navy all completely tied up. He expressed concerns about tying up our Navy, and when I asked him whether detaining enemy combatants on ships was a good approach, Secretary Panetta at the time said, no, not really. We need to have a long-term detention policy, and the notion that every time we capture somebody like al-Libi, we're going to keep him on a ship instead of bringing him to Guantanamo Bay and making sure that we take the time that our that the Higg team needs to fully interrogate someone like al-Libi to make sure that our country is protected, really puts our national security at risk to put a time frame on an interrogation like this. And so we're calling on the administration to come forward with that detention policy. And I think that the continuing to use Guantanamo as a top-rate detention facility rather than having people on ships makes most sense. But if that's not what they want to do, what is their alternative? Because if we're capturing more of these individuals tomorrow, which I hope happens, we can't continue to keep them on ships for shorter periods of time. We need to make sure that we can protect our country by gathering the maximum amount of information from terrorists like al-Libi.
Senator Chambliss, who's the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee.
Well, here we go again. A number of us were here a couple of years ago when a high-value target named Warsame was captured. And after we had been asking the administration for what is your long-term detention and interrogation policy, and we kept getting no response, it seems that they made a kind of a off-the-cuff decision to place Warsame on a ship and interrogate him for a period of 60 days. Well, you know, with respect to al-Libi, let's make no mistake about it. This is the highest value target we have captured in years. And this is a man who possesses significant information relative to the current operation of Al-Qaeda and all of its affiliates. We have in Guantanamo Bay today a number of Al-Qaeda operatives who also are very familiar with the long-term operation of Al-Qaeda and what's been happening. Today, with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other Al-Qaeda operatives at Guantanamo Bay, we are still, 10 years later, getting valuable information from those individuals. So what are we going to do with the latest guy who had very close ties to bin Laden, who has very close ties to Zawahiri? We're going to put him on a ship. And I guess we're going to keep him there for 60 days or so. And we're going to take him to New York, we hear, to be incarcerated and tried. Now, let me make very clear, as one who has been a strong advocate for not only the detention and interrogation of high-value targets at Guantanamo, but also the trial of enemy combatants at Guantanamo, I recognize that this individual, al-Libi, has been indicted in an Article III court. He ultimately ought to be tried in an Article III court. But in the meantime, when we have the opportunity to get valuable intelligence from a high-value target like al-Libi, we are foolish, and it just highlights the lack of a long-term policy by this administration, even though they have had years to develop it, for just how we're going to treat these high-value targets and how we're going to get that valuable intelligence that they possess. So here, instead of taking him to Guantanamo, declaring him as an enemy combatant, and just like with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and others at Guantanamo where we're gathering information, as opposed to that, we're going to send him to an Article III court. He's going to get lawyered up, and just like the surviving Boston bomber, he's going to go silent. And we're not going to be able to gather any information from this individual. So I am very disappointed that this administration, number one, has taken, you know, they've been in office for 5 years now. They do not have any detention interrogation policy, and I don't know that any's on the drawing board. I think certainly I would know it. I think Senator Graham, Senator Ayotte would know it because of the positions that we hold. And there simply is no plan out there. And now we're going to see the loss of valuable intelligence because of the ineptness of this administration. And that is a shame, and the American people deservedly ought to be very, very upset that we're going to lose that valuable intelligence that would simply save lives of Americans down the road. Thank you.
Question?
Taking someone to Guantanamo, wouldn't that complicate efforts to close it?
Well, not really. I mean, you got people there. Here's what I'm worried about. Guantanamo Bay as a detention site, if that's not the proper place to be holding people in the war on terror, let's find one that is. Sit down with the Congress, see if we can find an alternative to Guantanamo Bay. I happen to believe it works fine, quite frankly. I'm open-minded about what to do in the future, what to do about the people there, but when it comes to future captures, we were here 2 years ago. Whenever Warsame was captured. Right. I don't know if it was 2 years ago or not, but we're here making the same point. When you capture somebody, that's a good thing. It's much better than killing them with a drone. But if you don't have a system that allows you to gather intelligence in a meaningful manner, what's the purpose of, you're defeating the purpose of capture. These guys and gals that go in and do these raids, they risk their life. And not to have a system that can exploit their success, to me is letting them down and letting the country down. And the idea that you can get all you need to know from a guy who's been involved with terrorism for 20 years on a Navy ship in 60 days is offensive. That is not a rational way to gather intelligence in a war. And about his trial, I want him to be brought to justice, but the secondary concern to me is where he'd be tried. That's not my main focus. My main focus is to exploit what he knows, because the war is still ongoing. I want to find out from this guy how Al-Qaeda operates, and really the best tool of an interrogator is time. We've had people at Guantanamo Bay that said they know nothing about terrorism, and a year later we find out they know everything about Al-Qaeda. And when you take time off the table, when you're restricting the interrogation to 60 days on a ship, you're empowering your enemy, and you're letting down those who do the hard work to get them there to begin with. This policy is ill-conceived and it needs to be replaced. As to the Congress, I stand ready to work with the administration to find an alternative to using Navy ships, but if we continue to rely on this disposal mechanism of a high-value capture, of putting them on a Navy ship for a 60-day period to exploit intelligence, we're making a huge national security mistake. As to the disposition of detainees at Guantanamo Bay, that's a hard decision. That doesn't justify not having in place a system to exploit intelligence in an ongoing war.
Can I just say also that there hasn't been support in the Congress for closing Guantanamo. And so if the choice is that we're putting people on ships just because the political goal of the administration is to close Guantanamo, I don't think that's a good choice for protecting America. And right now Guantanamo is there. It's a top-rate detention facility, and until the Congress, working with the administration, makes a different decision, why wouldn't you use that rather than using this temporary ship situation where you don't have an opportunity to have the long-term interrogation of someone like al-Libi?
Senators, the Pentagon is saying that it is unable to pay military death benefits and provide other services to families of the fallen due to the shutdown. What do you say to those families, and has Congress dropped the ball on this?
I say to those families, your government has let you down at a time of your need. There is no excuse for this. There is no excuse for the Democrat, Republicans, the president not to negotiate. We all are held accountable here. This is not an acceptable way to run the most powerful nation in the world. One thing I'd like to say to these families, your government's let you down, but I'm sure they're very aware of the dangers presented by the war on terror. So we're here today to talk about detention policy. The Congress has let us down. The President has let us down as a nation for allowing the government to shut down and people like this to suffer. But what we're talking about today is something you see coming for a very long time. We've got to embrace the fact the war is not over. Intelligence gathering is the key to winning this war, and our intelligence gathering process is fundamentally broken. Guantanamo Bay should be used if it's not going to be closed. The political decision to put people on ships is compromising our ability to defend the nation and gather intelligence from a treasure trove suspect like al-Libi. It's a political decision. It's not a military decision. And I've been in the military for 30 years. I've never known of anyone to suggest as this is the best way to gather intelligence. You take a person off the battlefield and you put them on a ship for 60 days, and at the end of the 60 days you send them to federal court. Not one professional intelligence community person, military leader would suggest that's the best way to gather intelligence. He's dealing with a political problem called Guantanamo Bay. The problems with closing Guantanamo Bay are real. I'd like to find a way to solve that problem. But again, solving that problem and having that problem to deal with is no excuse to let the country down when it comes to gathering intelligence from somebody that we've captured recently. So as to death benefits not being paid, we all accept responsibility for that. But there's only one commander-in-chief. And our commander-in-chief today is not allowing the intelligence community and the military to adequately defend this nation after you capture somebody because of the intelligence gathering system that's been set up by the president administration is letting us all down. Imagine again, it's one of your loved ones that goes on one of these raids. They risk their life to snatch this guy. who's been involved for 20 years, and you find out that we can only hold them for 60 days? And look what we're losing as a nation. It's just not fair to the ones who are fighting this war to have such a system, and it's certainly not fair to the rest of us who depend on the intelligence community to protect us.
Senator, just a quick follow-up on that. Obviously, the president is moving down the road towards closing Guantanamo. He just recently named a DoD officials to oversee that process. If and when Guantanamo goes away, and you lose, like you said, you take time off the table, are you advocating for a return to these, the system that was in place before, these black sites that were run by?
No, I'm advocating for what I advocated with Senator McCain. A well-run detention facility that follows Common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention, the Detainee Treatment Act, and all international regimes. If you go to Guantanamo Bay today, it's Article 3 Geneva Convention compliant. It is one of the best-run military jails in the history of warfare. You've got two roads you're going down. You're trying to close Guantanamo Bay, and you're trying to fight the war. Well, let me tell you, the enemy is on the move. This lane of fighting the war is growing. Our need to gather intelligence is not lessening, it's growing. So as you deal with the problem of trying to close Guantanamo Bay, that is no excuse to deny the country the ability to gather intelligence. And a ship is not a substitute for Guantanamo Bay. So Mr. President, please work with the Congress, people in your own administration to change this before it's too late. Again, if we hold this guy for 60 days as an enemy combatant on a ship, and that's all we do to gather intelligence, it will be a huge mistake in the war on terror.
So how long should he be held?
As long as it's necessary. Ghilani was held for 2 years before he went to trial. And they made a speedy trial argument that he was denied the ability to have a speedy trial in an Article 3 court. And the court said no. It's reasonable to hold him as an enemy combatant because that's what he was, and it's reasonable to take 2 years to gather intelligence. Saxby knows better than all of us. The intelligence community is better. The best thing you can give them is time. I don't want to torture people. I don't believe in that as a military lawyer. I believe in the Geneva Convention, but the one thing I don't believe in is creating a system that denies your intelligence community and your military a reasonable opportunity to exploit intelligence to prevent the next coming attack. So leave it up to the professionals. We've had people at Guantanamo Bay held for more than 2 years. And it was only after a couple of years that we really were able to get anything out of them. Under the law of war, you have due process. For him to be held as an enemy combatant past 60 days, he will be entitled to a combat status review tribunal. He will be allowed to file a petition in federal court saying, I'm not a member of Al-Qaeda. He will be given due process. The government will have to prove he is in fact an enemy combatant. But once that burden is met, under the law of war, you have the ability to hold someone indefinitely for intelligence gathering purposes. That is the law of war. That's different than criminal law. Under criminal law, you can't hold someone for an indefinite period of time before they go to trial. In crime, you're trying to solve a crime. In a war, you're trying to defeat an enemy. And the best defense we have against Al-Qaeda is knowing what they're up to before they do it, because they don't mind dying. Killing them is not a deterrent. They just want to take you with them. So without the ability to gather an intelligence, you're really weakening your defenses in this war. So what this gentleman should be allowed is due process under the law of war. He'll have every right to go to a federal court and make the government prove he's in fact an enemy combatant. But once they meet that hurdle, the government can hold him as long as necessary to gather intelligence. And I can promise you this, when it comes to someone who's been in this business for 20 years, if you're limiting yourself to 60 or 90 days, you're making a grave mistake. Saxby, you might want to comment.
Well, I would just add to that the reason you don't want to say 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, the uncertainty on the part of that captured individual of not knowing how long he's going to be there provides a valuable tool to the intelligence community to gather information. As I said earlier, some folks have been in Guantanamo 10 years and we're still getting information from them. Not saying this guy should be there that long, but we don't want to put a definite timetable on it, whether it's 60 days or 2 years.
Well, they follow what we do. I mean, if the understanding is just hold out, because we can't hold you that long on a ship and it's only 2 months, why not wait it out? and then we lose the opportunity to get the information. And that's the problem that we face here with using a temporary facility like a ship as opposed to a long-term detention
You
facility.
got three examples now. You got Osama bin Laden's son-in-law. What was that guy's name? He was captured somewhere overseas, and he was interrogated from the plane ride to Italy back to New York. He was read his Miranda rights, and he asked for a lawyer, and he shut up. You had Osama that was on a ship, given a lawyer, end of intelligence gathering. If that happens here, it will be absolutely an unacceptable outcome to have somebody this high up in Al-Qaeda's operation not to be able to talk to him for more than 60 days. That's an unacceptable outcome.
And I guess the question I would ask of the administration, why the ship versus Guantanamo while Guantanamo remains open, understanding that they want to close it and there's a disagreement in the Congress on that issue. But what's the reason for the ship that would allow for protection of our country? What's your reasoning in terms of national security? Or is it really truly just a political decision? Because it seems to be a political decision, but when it comes to our national security, I think that the nation deserves better than that.
And I would ask two other questions. In this case, on al-Libi, why not New York? He's indicted in New York. Why didn't they take him to where they were going to try him? Why did they take him to a ship? I think the answer to that is pretty clear. They wanted the Hague to have an opportunity to interrogate him for some period of time. Is that their policy now? What if we capture Zawahiri tomorrow? What are we going to do with him? Now, if we're going to take him on a ship for 60 days, there will be outrage among Americans, and rightfully so. The point of my comments and of all of our comments here is that this administration has no idea how to handle high-value targets. That's pretty obvious. They didn't know what to do with Warsame. We actually got some valuable information from him during that 60-day period. Once he got lawyered up, he shut up. The same thing will happen here, and we will simply lose very valuable intelligence from a high-value target that we should be getting.
Senators,
Thank you.
You mentioned a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider any kind of stronger legislative action on this for this kind of tactics?
We're talking about that. You know, here's the problem. There's only one commander-in-chief. We have a say about detaining the Detainee Treatment Act. I helped author it with Senator McCain to make sure that people captured that we honored our international obligations and we didn't torture people, quite frankly. I don't know what role Congress can play here, but we need a meeting of the minds between the administration and the Congress, because this is going to come back to bite us. This is the third person we've captured in the last year or two that has valuable intelligence to be had, to be mined, but we don't have a system to get there. So I hope members of Congress will do more than just say, don't close Gitmo. And one last thing about ships. Under the Geneva Convention, a lawful combatant can't be detained on a ship unless you can prove is to the combatant's benefit. Now, he's not a lawful combatant, but there is a bias in military law not to hold prisoners on ships, and it goes back to the war between us and Britain, where American service members were held on the high seas in British ships that became prisons. During World War II, the Japanese put American service members on ships that were absolutely hellholes and just drove around the seas, and thousands of them died. So we really have a bias in the military about putting people in land-based prisons and not using ships. Now, it's not illegal to have him on this ship. It's just not practical to have him on this ship. And I would imagine most naval officers, when they're trained, they're never trained for the fact that as being a commander of a ship, you're going to be the jailer for the war on terror. This is not where the Navy wants to go.
Can I say that I believe this should be addressed in the defense authorization, because the defense authorization will be coming to the floor. We traditionally have the debate on the Guantanamo issue. Last year's defense authorization, we also raised a question to the administration about the Warsame case, saying, asking about the policy on the ship issue and how many people had been held on that. The answer to that is is in the classified setting, but we did raise this issue in the defense authorization, and I believe that that is a venue where this issue should be raised, because ultimately, if it's going to continue that every person who's captured going to be put on a ship, then this is an opportunity for us to say, what is your long-term detention policy?
Can you be more specific about the information you think Mr. Al-Libi might yield to prosecutors? I mean, most Americans are sick of war, frankly, so just saying national security does not seem to move the needle much. But can you describe any particular instances in which Mr. Al-Libi might be able to help Americans feel more safe?
Well, obviously, we don't know exactly what Al-Libi knows, but here's what we do know. He is charged and indicted in an Article 3 court in New York with being involved in the African bombings. We know that he's been charged, and there's got to be good substantive reasons why, for killing hundreds of individuals, including Americans. So at least there is knowledge on the part of the Department of Justice that he has information relative to those bombings. Does he know about other bombings? I don't know. The other thing that we know about him is that he was very close to bin Laden. And if he was close to bin Laden, what does he know about the planning of September 11 that we haven't learned from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and others at Guantanamo? We don't know the answer to that. He was he was captured in Libya. We just recently lost 4 Americans in Libya, in Benghazi, a little over a year ago. Was he involved, or does he have any knowledge about what happened in Benghazi? We don't know that. I assume he's being asked that today. I certainly hope he is, and I hope they're getting some information about that. But when you have an individual who was so close to bin Laden that he was one of his top confidants, there has to be an assumption that he possesses a great deal of knowledge about the workings of Al-Qaeda and about the planning of operations and the carrying out of operations by Al-Qaeda that have taken place that have killed Americans over the last dozen or so years.
I think one of the premises of your questions I disagree with. That America's war weary. Yes, we're war weary, but we're not too weary to fight Al-Qaeda, I hope. I think most Americans want to gather intelligence. Most Americans believe that Al-Qaeda still represents a threat to our nation, and that the only reason we haven't been attacked more than we have is because of good intelligence work, brave men and women in the military keeping the war overseas. I think most Americans would find it shocking to believe that their government has no plan when it comes to interrogating someone at this level. About Benghazi, just think for a moment. You've got a guy who's been charged with bombing an embassy in Tanzania and Kenya, and you've got a consulate that was bombed and overrun in Libya where he was staying. To suggest he knew nothing about that? Maybe it's a retirement home. Maybe there's an Al-Qaeda retirement community in Tripoli where people go when they're done with the war on terror. We also know from public reporting that he talked to Zawahiri while he was in Libya, the new head of Al-Qaeda. So if you can figure all that out in 60 days, good luck to you. And if you tell the terrorist, you just hold tight. Right. They can't keep you on a ship too long. Then next thing you know, you're gonna wait till you get your lawyer in America. We're at war, folks, and I am convinced that some good intelligence gathering would yield a lot of results when it comes to a person like Al-Libi. I can't believe he was not made aware of the impending attack on our consulate in Benghazi because it was never a protest gone bad. This was a pre-planned terrorist attack. And what are the odds of someone with his level of experience and leadership in Al-Qaeda having been in Libya maybe a year or two before the attack and know nothing about it? I think almost zero. So this is a classic example of why you want an interrogation system that will allow you to use the best weapon of all, which is time. Thank you.